Thank you, everybody. I've built up a list of 3 requests over the last few weeks since the point that I requested to have a slot to talk to you. I guess I should just say who the Open Rights Group is. I expect most of you do know who we are. We're a citizen-based organisation that campaigns for digital rights, which roughly speaking is your fundamental human rights applied to the digital age. So things like privacy, free speech are extremely important to us to defend in the UK. We have over 1,500 paying supporters, and we were set up in 2005. We've been fighting proposals like the Snoopers Charter and its predecessors for a number of years. I have 3 things to ask you, as I mentioned. I'll just let you know what those are, and I'll explain a little bit more about why afterwards. The 3 things are, firstly, I would like you to ask to be consulted about these proposals, the Snoopers Charter. You're the folks, many of you are the folks who may be asked in the future to implement some of these procedures, and it seems to us that the people who are being consulted are not all of you, but a narrow subsection of the people most interesting to the Home Office for political reasons. And that's not really an acceptable way to deal with public policy. You're the people who know many of the implications, both for your users, technically, and for the internet economy at large. You're the people who should be heard from, who can present some of the most expert evidence to the Home Office. And the fact that they're not running a public consultation and they're not therefore asking for that advice from you is both, in my view, insulting and irresponsible. So we have a form at openrightsgroup.org, linked from the front page there, which asks you just to simply say who you are, what kind of evidence you would submit, and make that request. It's literally a 5-minute job. It doesn't take any kind of policy commitment, but it does allow you to ask actually to be listened to. I have by mistake told you the whole of that point. That wasn't my intention. The second point I was going to ask you is to tell your customers. So I'll come back to that in the order that I meant. And the third is to consider making your data retention policies more transparent. So again, just to recap, I doubt there are that many people here who won't know what the Snoopers Charter or the Communications Data Bill is, but in case you missed any of it, it used to be called the Intercept Modernisation Programme. It used to be about collecting all subscriber traffic data in a huge single database. Now they're talking about a series of distributed databases that some of you may be asked to collect data into and operate. It was proposed in firm terms about this time last year. Ourselves and some other people managed to get that into the press. There was a minor panic. The Liberal Democrats wondered whether they really were just being asked to update police capacities to access telephone bill-like statements, or whether this was actually something rather more. They bargained to have a joint committee of both Houses of Parliament to examine the proposals, and then that took place until about November last year when they reported back. The joint committee did a reasonable job of analysing the bill. The bill has 3 broad areas. One was a sweeping power to compel anybody you like to collect subscriber traffic data, as long as you're operating a sort of electronic communications network. Then a second power to have a kind of analytics tool, which is called a filter in the proposals, but looks very much like a kind of data mining service to anybody reading between the lines and looking at what the powers would allow. It basically allows somebody to use a query to cut across many data sets and examine them in parallel. It's unclear whether that would require the consent of each individual data holder, or whether the police would just press a button saying, "Find me my wife's boyfriend, I want to know all about what's going on there, go," or find the journalist who's been talking to some person in the Home Office who shouldn't have been go. You know, it's unclear whether that's what's going on or whether they would have to collect the data up first. But it does look like essentially a very, very large kind of search facility, if you like, a data mining and profiling engine. The revised bill is due back on May the 8th in the Queen's Speech, or at least it's likely to be announced in the Queen's Speech. So Nick Clegg, right at this point, is trying to work out how much of a hot potato this is, whether the Home Office have actually addressed any of the Joint Committee's concerns. They've kind of made a bit of a wave at them, we think, but we don't think that they're very substantial revisions. The Open Rights Group and many of the other campaign groups involved have compiled a report which we're going to publish on May the 1st about where communications surveillance ought to go in the UK. And we've tried to look at things like user transparency, the problems with RIPA that already exist, and of course the huge capacities that the police actually have as the data available to them expands and expands exponentially. So back to the points that I was going to ask from you. I've kind of covered why I think you should be consulted. I think that should be obvious to you all. I hope many of you will be able to just go straight to our website, hopefully today, just make a submission asking for you to be consulted. That will be registered and we'll be able to give some push as a result of that if you help us in that way. The second thing I'd like you to consider doing, if you have a public policy blog or a website where you just explain to customers things that are going on, let your customers know that this is happening, that their user data may be collected and stored, that they have a right to know about this and to think about it, and that you as responsible operators want them to at least have their say in the democratic process, as opposed to all this happening in a relatively closed and just quiet as way as the government can handle. The third thing I'd like to ask of you, and I realise this will be a little bit more complicated for some of you, but I think is really important. One of the problems we have here is that as data surveillance grows, there is less and less transparency over it. You all have data retention policies. Most of them start off as being about your business needs, but it would be really, really helpful if you could consider making those very transparent to users, because it isn't clear at the moment what data is being kept by whom, why, to what extent the government is compelling operators to hold data for legal or voluntary legal kinds of law enforcement reasons, and that shifts this whole problem from being a simple one of the law wanting access to existing data that legitimately they might need for investigations, to a kind of private or at least secret surveillance by the state, which they ask you to do on their behalf. And the way, at least part of the way to get this debate into a sensible place, is for users to know what's going on and to be able to see what data that they are creating through your systems is available to the police and others. So thank you. That's my three requests. The most important of those, of course, is to do the consultation response or request a consultation that has to be listened to as soon as you can. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
We'll just sit down.
Okay, we have a question from John. Sorry, can I just remind questioners to state their name and affiliation for the webcast, please?
Yeah, my name is John Suter from Links. I'm speaking partly with the Links hat on and partly as a citizen. I'll make it clear which is which. With my Links hat on, as you probably know, we led the opposition to this disgusting bill, proposed bill, and Malcolm did fantastic work in coordinating the Links community and giving a voice against it. And indeed, that seemed to be, I'll try and find a suitable word. I was going to say reasonably effective. I'm not sure I even mean reasonably, actually. Somewhat effective, in that our evidence, as it was called, was cited many, many times in the Select Committee report. And I think Malcolm deserves huge praise for doing something that was really quite complicated and quite technical in getting that reply together. But actually what he did was he coordinated the views of Link's members. It wasn't Malcolm that was speaking there, it was a matter of distilling what the network community itself was saying, which was, frankly, universally hostile. It seems we've got to do it again. And my main purpose in speaking with a Links hat on is to appeal to the Links members here, and indeed, you don't have to be a Links member to do this. As you've said, everybody should do it. Please provide input so that a good response can be given. Speaking with the citizens hat on, I think this is just astonishing. Having promised to listen, it doesn't seem that that's the case at all. I'm amazed that they can somehow bring this back from the dead, because frankly, if you read the Select Committee's report, it ought to be dead, and it isn't. And so if anyone's complacent about this, this thing is like a zombie. It doesn't appear to be killable. I'm done. I could speak for long.
Okay, any other questions for Jim? Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. All those in favour of the comms data bill?